I'm Sa, and this is the story of how my husband thought he could outsmart me. It began with whispers in the dark. Bank transfers I didn't recognize. A name I'd never heard before, Leah Morrow. Dean wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to take everything. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't the kind of woman who fell apart quietly. I moved first. I locked down what was mine, and within a week, his entire scheme collapsed. The betrayal itself was devastating. But what cut deeper was how long he'd been preparing for it, the layers of lies. The patience, the sheer effort he'd put into trying to ruin me. One night I woke to an empty bed. The sheets beside me were cold. For a moment, I assumed Dean had gone to the bathroom or to get some water. Then I heard his voice low, careful, almost tender. The hallway light was off. Moonlight spilled across the floor in thin silver lines as I followed the sound, my stomach tightening with every step. Just a little longer, he murmured. She doesn't suspect anything yet. I froze. His voice was smooth, reassuring, like he was calming someone down. My heart slammed in my chest. Who was he talking to? I strained to hear more, but his words dissolved into whispers. My hands curled into fists. This wasn't a work call. Dean never whispered for work. He never cared if I overheard him. Before I could retreat, his footsteps turned toward me. I rushed back to the bedroom and slipped under the covers just as he came around the corner. My pulse thundered as the mattress dipped beneath his weight. I kept my breathing slow, even. Minutes passed. Then he exhaled, long and relaxed, as if nothing had happened. I turned toward him, blinking as if half asleep. Where were you? Bathroom, he said instantly. A lie? And the phone call? Client, he replied without missing a beat. Had to smooth out some case details. I searched his face for hesitation. There was none. Just that familiar, unreadable calm. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it really was work. But the words echoed in my head, she doesn't suspect anything yet. I swallowed and turned away. My instincts were screaming, but I ignored them. Not tonight. Not yet. The next morning, I woke before Dean. He was still asleep, his arm draped across the pillow where my head had been. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and padded into the kitchen. I rarely checked our accounts. Dean handled the finances, and until that moment, I'd trusted him completely. But something felt wrong, and I was finally ready to look. I scrolled through the transactions, my stomach tightening with every line. 2,000, a dozen withdrawals over the last 3 months. None large enough to scream theft, but frequent enough to feel deliberate. Dean and I shared expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, but we also kept separate accounts for personal spending. These charges weren't bills. They weren't investments. And they definitely weren't anything we talked about. I drew a shaky breath, gripping my phone too tightly. Footsteps sounded behind me. I locked the screen and turned as Dean appeared in the doorway, rubbing the back of his neck, half asleep. Morning, he mumbled. What's for breakfast? I set my phone on the counter. I was about to ask you the same thing. He smirked and poured himself a cup of coffee. Guess it's your turn then. I watched him take a sip, his free hand resting casually on the counter. I checked our bank account this morning. He froze just for a fraction of a second. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. His fingers tightened around the mug before he let out a short laugh. And there are a lot of small withdrawals, I said, crossing my arms. Things I don't recognize. Just a few investments, he replied smoothly. Business opportunities. Business opportunities? I echoed. He nodded, setting the mug down. Short-term gains. Nothing to worry about. I was lying. I could feel it in my bones. I just didn't know why. The unease followed me all day. Dean didn't help. He stayed glued to his phone, stepping into other rooms for calls. When he set it down, the screen always faced the table. And every time I looked at him, it felt like there was something solid between us, a wall that hadn't existed before. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Dean had always been confident, charming, the kind of man who could talk his way out of anything. But I'd been with him long enough to recognize the signs. The distance. The careful wording. the ease with which he dismissed my questions. Something was wrong. I turned toward him. He was already asleep, breathing evenly, his face peaceful like a man with nothing to hide. I wasn't fooled. A quiet voice pressed into my thoughts, one I'd spent all day trying to silence. Am I being paranoid? Or am I finally seeing the truth? Morning came without answers. I'd barely slept, my thoughts looping endlessly, replaying every misread flag from the past few months. Dean's tone from the night before echoed in my head, casual, dismissive, calculated, the voice of someone hiding something in plain sight. I dragged myself through my routine, every movement automatic. Then Dean walked into the kitchen like everything was normal. "Morning, babe," he said, kissing my temple. "I was thinking we should get our finances organized. Just in case of emergencies." My stomach dropped. I froze, my fingers tightening around my coffee mug. "Our financials?" I repeated carefully. "Yeah." Dean leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee, like this was the most ordinary conversation in the world. "Do you have a full list of your accounts? Passwords, assets, stuff like that? We should keep everything in one place." My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Dean had never shown interest in my personal finances. We shared a joint account for bills, but our savings had always been separate. That wasn't an accident. It was how we'd agreed to live. I swallowed and forced my face to stay neutral. "I guess I could put something together?" His mouth curved into a small smile, but his eyes flickered just for a split second. Then he nodded and smoothly changed the subject, like the moment hadn't mattered at all. But my mind was already racing. This wasn't about emergencies. This wasn't about us. Dean was preparing for something, and whatever it was, he didn't want me to see it coming. That evening, he was almost disturbingly relaxed, laughing at the TV, scrolling through his phone, suggesting takeout like we were having a perfect, normal night. He was playing the role of the loving husband flawlessly, and that's what made my skin crawl. Something about him had shifted the way he moved, the way he spoke. Everything felt practiced, too smooth, too easy. Then it happened. Dean stood up and headed for the shower, leaving his phone on the coffee table. He never left his phone unattended. My pulse spiked as I stared at it. The screen was face down, just like it had been for weeks. Then, like the universe cracked the door open for me, a notification lit up the screen. A text message from a name I didn't recognize. Elia Morrow. I didn't think. I reached for the phone, my hands trembling as I tilted it just enough to read the preview. Just make sure she stays in the dark. Almost there. My breath caught. Pain tightened across my chest, so suddenly it hurt. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. Who the hell was Elia Morrow? And what did almost there mean? My finger hovered over the screen. In that half second, 100 possibilities crashed through my mind. Another woman, a planned exit. Money siphoned away behind my back. Then I heard the water shut off. Panic surged. I set the phone back exactly where it had been and sank into the couch, gripping my knees to steady myself. A minute later, Dean walked back in, toweled around his shoulders, drying his hair like nothing had changed. "Did you decide on dinner?" he asked. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Not yet." He picked up his phone without hesitation and unlocked it, completely at ease. Like there wasn't a single secret in the world. But now, I knew better. I spent the rest of the night trying to explain it away. Maybe Ilya was a colleague, a business partner. Maybe keeping me in the dark meant something harmless, something I was twisting into fear. But deep down I knew the truth. The pieces were sliding into place. The missing money, the late-night call, the sudden interest in my finances, the lies delivered so effortlessly. I could have confronted him right then. But if I was right, if Dean was hiding something, this calculated die didn't need answers. I needed proof, so instead I kept my mouth shut. I let him kiss me goodnight. Let him slide under the covers like nothing was wrong. Then I lay there awake, gripping my phone, whispering into the dark. Who the hell is Ilya Morrow? The question followed me into morning, gnawing at my thoughts. I moved through my routine like a ghost showering, dressing, pouring coffee my body on autopilot, while my mind stayed locked on one thing, Ilya Morrow. The name lodged itself in my head like a splinter. Small, sharp, impossible to ignore. Dean sat across from me at breakfast, scrolling through his phone, completely at ease. I wondered if he knew I'd seen the message. If he did, he hid it well. Then, as if sensing my scrutiny, he looked up and smiled. "Babe Bave, can you sign something real quick?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Sign what?" I asked lightly. "Just some financial updates." "Tax stuff," he said, sliding a document across the table. His tone was casual. His fingers weren't. They drummed against the table in an uneven rhythm. "Tell." I picked up the papers, my stomach tightening as I skimmed the first page. Dense legal language. Too dense. This wasn't about taxes. I flipped to the last page. Property transfer agreement. My pulse roared in my ears. My assets, my savings, the condo. Everything quietly, neatly moved into his name. I looked up. Dean was watching me, a careful smile fixed in place. "Dean," I said, my voice too calm. "What is this?" "It's just a precaution," he replied smoothly. "A legal convenience. Nothing changes between us." "Nothing changes?" I held up the paper. "You're asking me to sign over everything I own." "Not everything," he said quickly. "Just consolidating for protection, in case something happens." My hands shook not with fear, but with rage. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't insecurity. This was calculated, planned. And he was sitting across from me, pretending it was no big deal. I placed the document back on the table, slow and deliberate, and met his gaze. "I'm not signing this." His smile twitched. His jaw tightened for half a second before he laughed. "Saw, don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork. Then why are you so eager for me to sign it without reading it?" The air shifted. "You really don't want to do this," he said quietly. He leaned in, voice low, controlled, but underneath it was something else. A warning. I didn't blink. "Is that a threat, Dean?" He leaned back, arms crossing over his chest. The smile vanished, replaced by an unsettling calm. "I think you're making this harder than it needs to be," he said evenly. I stayed silent. He waited, watching for tears, anger, panic. Any crack he could exploit. I gave him nothing. Instead, I smiled. It's just enough to make his eyes narrow. "You know what?" I said, standing and gathering the papers. "You're right. I need to think about it." That caught him off guard. I placed the documents neatly on the counter and walked away. No argument, no confrontation. Not yet, because now I was paying attention. That night, Dean acted like nothing had happened. Made himself a drink, watched the news, scrolled his phone like he hadn't just tried to strip me of everything I owned. And that's when it finally settled in. This was never about saving our marriage. He wasn't fixing anything. He was planning his exit hand. He wanted to leave with everything. The next morning, I found him in the living room, sipping coffee like a man without a care in the world. When I sat across from him, he looked up immediately. "We need to talk," he said. I tilted my head. "Oh," he sighed, like this was difficult for him. "I think we should separate." There it was. It's delivered cleanly, rehearsed, final. "It's not working anymore," he continued. "You have to see that." I let the silence stretch. "You've been planning this," I said finally. Something flickered across his face, gone before it could settle. "It's for the best. We've grown apart." I leaned forward. "You mean you want out, but not empty-handed?" He didn't deny it. Something hardened inside me then, a calm I hadn't felt before. So I leaned back, folded my hands, and said evenly, "I already moved my assets." Dean froze. His shoulders stiffened. His breath hitched just barely. "What do you mean?" His voice was sharp now. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Exactly what it sounds like. His jaw clenched. And for the first time since this began, I knew he hadn't seen that coming. I saw it then, the exact moment he realized he'd lost. Dean had spent months orchestrating this. Every conversation, every withdrawal, every carefully placed lie. He'd built his plan piece by piece, convinced he was the smartest person in the room. And he hated that I'd dismantled it. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally he stood, grabbed his coffee, and took a slow sip. When he turned back to me, his smile had returned, but it was different now. Colder. Calculated. "You're going to regret this, Saw." I didn't know if it was a threat or a bluff. Maybe both. Either way, I was ready. Dean had played his hand. Now it was my turn. The morning felt heavier than usual. The apartment was too quiet, the air dense. Coffee tasted bitter as I moved through my routine, forcing myself not to replay his words. Then came the knock. Sharp, measured, official. I set my mug down and opened the door. A man in a navy blazer stood there, holding a thick envelope. Keller. Yes, you've been served. The door closed behind him before I could respond. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. I already knew what was inside, but I sat at the kitchen table anyway, slid my nail under the flap and pulled the documents free. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I scanned the pages, my eyes catching on the numbers. Half the condo, half the car, half of everything. Spousal support for good measure. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Of course he'd try to take it all. This wasn't impulse. This was the endgame of a plan he'd been building for months, maybe years. The smell of polished wood and fresh paper surrounded me as I sat across from my attorney later that day. She flipped through the documents, her expression shifting into something almost amused. Well, she said, tapping the page, he's got nothing. I raised an eyebrow. That simple? She smiled. That's simple. He moved everything into a trust before he filed. Legally, it's untouchable. Yet. He can try for spousal support, but given your income history versus his, he won't get far. The tension drained from my shoulders in a slow exhale. For the first time since this started, I felt steady. Dean had thought he was running the game. He never saw me changing the board. That evening, I'd just poured myself a glass of wine when the front door slammed open. I didn't flinch. Dean stood there, rage radiating off him. His tie was loose, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. You think you're clever, don't you? His voice was sharp, venomous. I took a slow sip of wine. I think I finally protected myself. His hands curled into fists. You planned this? I tilted my head. So did you. Silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, he muttered. This isn't over, I didn't argue. I'd won the first battle, but I knew better than to think he'd walk away quietly. For a brief moment, there was relief. He no longer had his hands on my finances. He no longer had leverage, but I should have known. The first real sign of trouble didn't come at home, it came at work. It started with looks. Not casual glances, lingering ones. Conversations that dropped into silence the moment I walked into a room. By mid-morning, my assistant Rachel hovered in my doorway longer than usual. I think you should know something. I looked up from my laptop already drained. What is it? She shifted, twisting her fingers together. There's a rumor going around. I didn't want to repeat it, but just tell me. She exhaled. People are saying you took money from your joint accounts, that you were, her voice dropped, laundering funds. The words hit hard.
What?
I don't believe it, she rushed to add, but Dean's been talking. 2 lawyers, mutual friends. The story's spreading. My stomach twisted as fury flared hot and fast. Dean wasn't just trying to take my money anymore. He was trying to destroy me. By the time I reached my lawyer's office, I was barely holding it together. This needs to stop, I said, slamming a stack of printed screenshots onto Patricia's desk. Now, she skimmed the pages, then let out a dry, unimpressed chuckle. Well, he's certainly panicking. He's slandering me. Yes, she said calmly, leaning back, and that works in our favor. False statements like this open him up to defamation. We send a CSA and desist first. If he ignores it, we escalate. I don't want this dragged through court, I snapped. I just want him to stop. Patricia's gaze sharpened. He wants a reaction. That's the point. She's right. I turned to see Beatrice standing in the doorway, arms crossed, expression knowing. You react emotionally, and he controls the pace, she said. You stay quiet and strategic, and he spirals. I nodded, swallowing the anger burning in my chest. Dean wanted a fight. He was about to get one on my terms. That evening, I found him at La Rue, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, laughing over drinks with 2 colleagues. The sight of him sitting there, relaxed and smug, like he hadn't spent days poisoning my reputation, made my blood boil. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I walked up to the table, leaned in close, and whispered, You have no idea what you've just started. His smirk flickered just for a heartbeat before settling back into place. Let's see what you've got, he murmured. That was his last warning. I was done playing fair. Dean had tried manipulation, intimidation, control. He'd failed at every turn. Now he was desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. I was halfway through my morning coffee when my phone rang. "Patricia," I answered, already bracing myself. "You need to come in," she said without hesitation. "Dean just filed for a full financial audit." The words sent a sharp jolt through me. I set my mug down slowly. "On what grounds?" "He's claiming you mismanaged joint funds and owe him a settlement," she said. "It's baseless, but that's not the point." "Of course it isn't," I muttered. "He wants to bleed me dry. Time, money, stress." Exactly. Dean didn't play to win outright. He played to exhaust. "Not this time," I said. "I'll be there in an hour." When I arrived, Patricia already had his filings spread across her desk, marked up in red. "Here's the good news," she said. "He doesn't have a single piece of real evidence. The bad news? If the court indulges him, this could drag on. What's our move?" "We counterfile for immediate dismissal," she said. "We request that he cover all legal costs if the court deems this a stalling tactic." I smiled. "Let's do it." 2 weeks later, I sat across from Dean in a courtroom. He looked polished, confident. His tie was a little too tight, his smirk barely restrained. He thought this was his moment. His attorney stood first. "Your Honor, my client believes Mrs. Keller deliberately moved assets to avoid a fair settlement. We request a full forensic audit of all financial activity over the past 6 months." I didn't move. Patricia rose calmly, adjusting her glasses. "Your Honor, all of my client's financial decisions were made before Mr. Keller filed for divorce," she said evenly. "There is no evidence of fraud, mismanagement, or concealment." She stepped forward and placed a thick binder on the table. "We can prove it." "Additionally," Patricia continued evenly, "we request that this motion be dismissed with prejudice and that Mr. Keller be required to cover all legal fees." As this is a clear attempt at financial harassment, the judge took their time reviewing the documents. The courtroom went silent, heavy, expectant. Dean watched me from across the aisle, waiting for a crack, flinch, anything. I gave him nothing. Finally, the judge looked up. "The court finds no grounds for a full financial audit, so the motion is denied. Furthermore, due to the lack of evidence, Mr. Keller will be responsible for all legal fees associated with this claim." The gavel struck. It's just like that. Dean lost again. Outside the courtroom, he brushed past me without stopping. As he did, he leaned in just enough to mutter, "You think this is over? Just wait." I didn't respond. I'd won the battle, but men like Dean don't walk away after losing. They don't accept defeat. They retreat, rework the plan, and come back uglier. And Dean had invested too much time to let this end quietly. I didn't have to wait long to see his final move. The call came the next morning. "Sa, we have a problem," Patricia said. I tightened my grip on the phone. "What now?" There was a pause. Papers shuffled. "Dean and Ilya have filed a formal complaint. They're accusing you of financial fraud, claiming you falsified records over several months." The air left my lungs. If that accusation stuck, this wouldn't just be about money. This would be criminal. "They submitted documentation," Patricia continued. "If the court entertains it, you could be facing a full investigation." The room tilted slightly. I pressed my fingers to my temple, steadying myself. "And the documents?" I asked. "Are they real?" She scoffed. "No, but they're convincing. Whoever forged them knew what they were doing, of course." "Ilyatha, architect behind the curtain." Patricia added, "I had Beatrice review them before calling you, and she caught something." Hope flickered. "What?" "The timestamps," she said. "They don't match reality. The transactions reference accounts that didn't even exist at the time." I exhaled sharply. That was the crack. The mistake that would unravel everything. Fear burned away, replaced by something colder. Focused. Dean wanted a war. Fine. I wasn't just going to survive it, I was going to end it. By the time I reached Patricia's office, my decision was already made. "I don't want to just defend myself," I said, planting my palms on her desk. "I want to go on the offensive." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good," she said, "'cause we're ready." She slid a folder toward me. "We brought in a forensic financial analyst," I confirmed that those documents were doctored, sloppily, once you know where to look. Her smile was sharp. Satisfied. So here's the plan, she continued. We file a motion proving the evidence is fraudulent. Then we sue Dean and Ilya for defamation and falsifying legal records. I didn't hesitate. I want full damages. Patricia nodded slowly, and let's bury them. And for the first time since this began, I knew. Dean hadn't just lost control. He had made a fatal mistake. Patricia leaned back, a satisfied smile on her face. I thought you might say that. 2 weeks later, I faced Dean in court for the last time. I watched him closely as Patricia laid out our case, her voice calm but sharp, carrying across the courtroom. These documents submitted against my client were fabricated. We have irrefutable proof that the financial transactions listed never occurred. The forensic analyst took the stand, walking the court through every false timestamp, every manipulated number. Dean's lawyers squirmed. They knew they were losing. Then came the knockout punch. Patricia placed a fresh folder on the judge's desk. Your Honor, in light of these fraudulent accusations, my client is countersuing Mr. Keller and his associate, Ilya Moro, for defamation and submitting falsified legal evidence. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Dean's lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently. Dean's jaw tightened, his face pale. Finally, his lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw his claims. Of course he did. There was no other option. The judge nodded. Motion dismissed. Furthermore, Mr. Keller will be responsible for all legal costs. Dean had lost completely. As we left the courthouse, he passed by without a word. I didn't stop him. I didn't need to. Let him take a few steps, then whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "We're done here." For the first time in months, I felt at peace. No more hearings, no more threats, no more waking in the night, fearing Dean's next move. I had one. It wasn't dramatic. No fireworks, no heroic declarations. Just silence, the calm after a storm, heavy with relief, but free of fear. 2 days later, I met Patricia one last time. She slid a final stack of papers across the desk. It's done. Dean signed the settlement. I exhaled slowly, fingers hovering over the documents before scanning them. Everything was as I'd hoped. Dean got nothing, not a dime. His financial claims dismissed, his defamation case backfired, his reputation in ruins. Patricia watched me with a smile. How do you feel? I laughed softly. Lighter. She nodded. Good, you deserve that. I packed the papers into my bag and stood. Thank you, Patricia, for everything. She shook my hand firmly. Go enjoy your life, Sa. You've earned it. And for the first time in a long while, I believed her. That evening, Beatrice and my mother insisted on a victory dinner. Margot greeted me with a warm hug, relief shining in her eyes. It's over. Yes, I murmured. It is. Beatrice raised her glass, a mischievous grin on her face. To freedom and to never letting a man think he can outsmart you again. I clinked my glass with hers, laughing. I'll drink to that. We ate, we talked, we reminisced. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, bracing for the next blow. The war was over. Later, I stood on my balcony gazing at the Chicago skyline. The city lights shimmered endlessly. Everything had changed. I was no longer the woman who ignored warning signs. No longer the woman who clung to illusions of safety. I had lost trust, time, and a version of love I once believed in, but I had gained more. Strength, clarity, control. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. Blocked. I turned back to my laptop, opening a blank document. A new chapter, a new story, my story. I whispered to myself, this is my story now. Life tests us in ways we least expect. Sometimes the people we trust betray us the deepest. But strength isn't avoiding betrayal, it's rising after it. I could have let fear consume me. I could have let the betrayal break me. But instead I fought for my dignity, my freedom, my future. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this, you are stronger than you think. No matter how blindsided you feel, no matter how impossible it seems, you can rise. And sometimes walking away from what no longer serves you is the greatest victory of all.